Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What Magic Is This Podcast, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. I am your host, as you should know by now, Douglas Batchelor, and we have a very interesting and, dare I say, different episode for everyone today, because today we're going to be focusing on not something as specific as some might think, but perhaps we are. But we are joined by a fantastic guest, and I am so excited to really dip into this one. So I'd like everybody to flash back, if they can, to a, dare I say, maybe a bit more stable world of January of 2020. And in and around that period of time, I released an episode about the devil. And looking back now, I realized that perhaps I should have done a bit more digging. The conversation itself wasn't as nuanced as I would probably have wanted it to be. And so recently, I had the great pleasure of being able to provide a kind word in the front of a book written by another podcaster who will be my guest today, which is Darragh Mason of Spirit Box Podcast. He has written a novel called Song of the Dark Man, Father of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads. And I felt that this was just a fantastic book, and it has almost all of the elements that I believe was missing from my episode on the devil. So before we get it kicked off, because we are going to be literally talking about this strange figure of the Dark Man for this episode, I need to ask you, Darragh, because it's so easy for us to get lost in the details of talking about some of the more specific things here. But I have to ask you, because in the beginning of your book, you say asking what is the Dark Man is the wrong question. So you mentioned that there are patterns that this figure shows himself in. As soon as we get going, firstly, welcome back to What Magic Is This? But also, are you able to elucidate the listeners on what sort of patterns surround this strange figure?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you for welcoming me back onto What Magic Is This? One of my favorite shows. So lovely to be here. I suppose the whole concept of the book started because I started to notice this pattern, and I should say it started for me in the folklore. I started noticing this pattern in Irish folklore, and then I saw the pattern mirrored in interviews with magical practitioners and witches and people giving their essentially the story of how they got into the whatever practice they had, and those who had particularly a kind of a bend towards witchcraft would mention regularly would mention seeing an apparition of a dark man, which they would call the man in black, or the dark man, or the witchfather, this kind of stuff. So I looked into it from there, and I started to kind of see kind of discernible characteristics within that pattern. And again, they were matched by I could find the threads in Irish folklore, and to be fair, to a degree in some kind of British and beyond into Western Europe folklore as well. But I focused, for the point of this book, I focused primarily on Irish folklore. But those were the dark appearance and appellation, so that the title would tend to refer to black, dark, that kind of thing. An appearance as a composite being. So the technical term is a therianthrope, where you would have like your classic pan, the bottom half being that of a goat, and then the top half being human and then horned. That type of composite being. It was also shape-shifting and demonstrating occult prowess, ability to use magic to influence events. There's also kind of what I call the interceptor. One thing that comes up in these stories again and again, really, really regularly, is these interrupted journeys, these traveling at night, often kind of along lonely Irish roads in the hinterlands, and their journey being interrupted by this dark figure, and in Irish, the dark figure is called An Fear Dubh, the black man, or An Fear Dorcha, the dark man. And that appeared again and again. And again, you could overlay that onto some of the accounts that we get from the Scottish witch trials from the 17th century. You get the same thing, intercepted journeys, and then finally there's sexuality and a sexual interest in human beings, and a consummated sexual congress with human beings. It comes up again and again, and that was kind of the pattern that I spotted, and I saw this in folklore, right back to very early Irish folklore around the Fenian cycle, where you had kind of almost the inverse. While the character who jumps out as kind of like, it was called a dark druid, right? Or it's called An Fear Dorcha in these stories.
Yeah.
Shapeshifts himself, appears as other people. He uses a hazel wand to turn a woman into a deer. And then that pattern of turning a woman into a deer turns up several times, like quite specifically, with various different characters who also have a dark appellation, so it was one of those things where it's like, and kind of built it out from there. Yeah. But that is where that's kind of broadly the pattern,
Sure. Yeah, I kind of tipped my hat at the beginning of this episode by evoking the name the devil, right? And so a lot of people will be like, well, why are you doing an episode about this, Douglas? And I think it's important because you've done a really cool comparative. I think comparativism is one of the things that is the greatest tool that we have now, particularly for people who are operant magicians and otherwise. When we have all of these records that we're able to finally have translated and look at again, and we're able to put fresh eyes on them, we are able to notice these patterns. So people are going to want to know right away, is the dark man just the devil, or are they something different, something more distinct?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a meaty question. But I think, and this is a terrible answer to start with, but bear with me. But yes and no, right? Certainly, like the phrase on the dark man, An Fear Dorcha, means the devil.
Okay,
wow. Right. It is absolutely, you'd understand that being the devil within Irish folklore. Is it the Christian devil? I would say that's an Abrahamic viewpoint.
Right.
When we look at, it's as much the devil as Pan is the devil. In that essence, it's very much, we're talking about, an inspirational, disruptive force that is absolutely primal in nature, and I would say to some degree is the dark daemon of the earth, of nature. When we talk about the devil or the experiences with the dark man, they are terrifying. Those intercepted journeys I describe, or I mentioned, both in folklore and in the accounts of Isabel Gowdy, for example. Those intercepted journeys are terrifying. And I pull the thread of the intercepted journey to be that, that intercepted sleep. You'd be amazed the amount of people who've told me about, I woke up and there was a dark man standing over my bed.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, but it's a version of the same thing. It's that interruption. And, so I would say it is what we would call the Christian devil, but its motivations, I don't think, are that of the what you would say is the Abrahamic devil.
Right. Just here to tempt each and every one of us with what we call evil, right?
Correct.
There's a lot of people, and I'm sure when people grab your book and they start to look through it, they'll be like, well, not all of these. It's tough to put on such a dualistic veneer on all of this, because people have interactions with these the assemblage of these patterns, and they have what could be construed of as being wildly artistic and very fruitful consequences of these meetings. How is that necessarily bad? And what the Dark Man, and what I find interesting in your book is the Dark Man is that category, it defies categorization. It's these things are disruptors. They don't allow for this very Christianized ideas that if you have an interaction of this variety, that's a bad interaction. You've been tricked, and then you need to get back on God's side. It's not that simplistic. So yeah, that's what I think one of the things that was missing in my devil episode, right? Is just that while we can look at all of this stuff and we all have our ideas in our mind as to what the devil is and what their purview can be, there's other aspects of this kind of personification of darkness and chaos that defies such easy categorization. Anyhow, one of the things that was very interesting about reading your book is this idea of witch blood. And without giving away too much, how do we? Because we find it hard to talk about. I'm going to use quotes here. Blood. We did to. A lot of people, when they use the term blood, they'll be talking about things, and we can kind of be like, well, that's a little bit shady when conversations head this way. But you were somewhat fearless in talking about the idea of witch blood. So how do you define witch blood, and how is it relevant to the Dark One?
Yeah. I mean, you're quite right to tread with caution into that one. It's a thorny subject, which is why in the book I talk more about kind of having a fire in the blood, which is kind of leans into that kind of inspiration that often comes with this experience, and then kind of to an extent with one's daimonic experience as well. But I would say, well, first off, I think why it's a thorny subject is there's an association with kind of like blood and hereditary rights and, ugly things like eugenics, right? So I think that's where, because it's couched in that language, it can have those connotations, and that can be difficult. But what I really think witch blood maybe is, it's like having a propensity or a proficiency towards magic, or in this case towards witchcraft, and that might be kind of like a raw talent. Equally, that doesn't mean immediate proficiency, right? That's why every culture in the world has some kind of magic school or shamanic training and what have you. And equally, that can be completely spontaneous, with no background in one's family whatsoever. And at the same time, it can be completely hereditary, and with familial lines that people have these talents and skills and kind of this bend towards witchcraft. People often describe it as being dormant for generations. Maybe there's a witch back in one's family line, and equally that might not be the case at all. So it's a signifier of a difference, and I talk to it a little bit around where, going back to that pattern where we have kind of like the sexual interest of this being, or avatars or manifestations or emanations of this being having a sexual interest in humans. There's some like witch cults that very much see that they have a hereditary capability because there's fairy lineage in their lines. right? So their ancestry is not fully human, essentially, and that might sound very outlandish. And to be fair, I cop out a little bit in the book with that, like, because I'm like, oh, this is a punchy one, but I think it's mostly a metaphor, But I wrote the book 2 years ago, so I probably feel a little bit more comfortable with saying I'm not sure that's a metaphor at all, actually.
Okay.
So, but then again, culturally, you look at the idea of hybridism with jinn, very prevalent in the Middle East. Hybridism with fairies. Those ideas there's lots of family names that in Ireland that they're said to have like a fairy lineage. Same thing with banshees following families. Well, why are they following those families? Right. Yeah. What's the reason? There's a connection to them.
Yeah. It's strange because these places and these climes that we find ourselves, magic and the occult, I think a lot of people tend to forget that, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but we tend to forget that these ideas are mainly meant to disrupt. And as much as we try to sanitize magic as being for everybody and it's equal accessible for everybody, there certainly are things that occur. And what I love about the way that you approach Witch Blood is that that this is something that needs to be discussed. Like this is an aspect that there's this fire within the blood that seems to be going through, that certain people can do these kind of things almost more proficiently. They seem the calling a little bit more than others do. And so to just be able to say like, well, I don't like the terminology used, witch blood, I'm going to keep it away. That's nonsense. I don't even want to engage in that. I think as occultists and magicians, this is something this is well worth talking about. It truly is. And it probably is something that's a discussion in and of itself. But I have to commend you for even being brave enough, truly, to actually bring it up, because I know a lot of people that would just be like, that's bullshit for even Darragh to think that. But there's part of what you say that I think there is, it can be metaphorical, but I also think because it's magic, there's a very real element to it.
I mean, it comes up again and again in the folklore.
Yeah.
One of the core characters that essentially carries the Fenian cycle tradition that bridges the gap between the hero cycle, the age of heroes in Ireland into the age of St. Patrick, is a half fairy being.
Yeah.
Right. Who debates with St. Patrick. Right. And there was Irish monks were writing this down.
Yeah.
Right. They were writing about a half fairy, almost said half hairy, half fairy hero, poet, warrior, Oisín. Names means little deer because his mother was a deer. Right. All of this is instigated by the Dark Man, which we'll get into the kind of meat and bone of that story. But so this somehow we get this story, this half fairy being traversing the centuries to having this debate with St. Patrick about the Christian God versus the heroes of the Fenians, and who had moral superiority. And because it was treated so fairly by the kind of the Irish Christian monks, like it hints to it like a dual practice within the Irish psyche at the time.
Yeah. I did a series of episodes on fairies. Fairies are all nice and fun. I think that, everybody sees fairies and we had a good laugh, but I'm with you. I see certain patterns as well. And when Robert Kirk, because I focus more on my ancestry, which is more Scottish than Irish. When you read something like Robert Kirk's The Secret Commonwealth, when he talks about how he's plainly talking about ESP and psi abilities being the domain of the seventh sons of seventh son. That's not a literary device. Like, people were noticing these things and he was writing it down, right? So again, it's probably well worth a much larger discussion, but I again have to say I really love that you went there. And some people might be like, Doug's making a big deal out of this, but I truly do think it's one of those things that I like this stuff because these questions are not just of a philosophical bent; they are one of something that I think is a very real phenomenon. And I'm not trying to solve it.
Yeah.
I just think it's I think it's very fascinating and very interesting. And to just say, like, I don't like the way that it's couched and the terminology that it's used, and it's just all metaphorical. It's not to be taken literally. It's like,
Yeah.
there is an objective truth to some of this. I actually truly think that.
Yeah. It's I agree. And interesting that you bring up like Kirk's work and the Secret Commonwealth, because there's a passage in that where he describes exactly like a Highlander man, having a sexual relationship with a fairy woman, and his life force almost being drained by it, and the Irish folklore, you have the Lanashi, very much kind of like this vampiric fairy lover, and that you, like within Jinn lore, you've got these extraordinary things where, Aisha Kandisha, this Moroccan, quite a big figure in North Africa, Central and Morocco, was said to have 35,000 human husbands, who were love crazed for her. They could never look at another woman. And to the point where today, you can buy women who are looking to court find a husband will buy things like you've heard of gin rings. You can get gin rings around the gin kings. They'll have certain boons with them. But and there's also an Aisha Kandisha ring.
So just so people, I'm pretty much 85% sure that people know what you're talking about when you say gin. But are you able to just for those that
sure.
What are gin?
So gin are essentially kind of they're, one would call them kind of spirit beings that have very direct influence in the material world within the Arabic world and kind of in more modern context within the Islamic world, and very much are mentioned in the Quran like dozens and dozens of times. I mean, one could say that fairies would be Irish jinn.
Right.
It's a catch-all term that has many different stratas of different types of jinn, kind of Marid, Ifrit, and so on and so forth. And there's huge diversity within that word, as much as you'd find diversity within the word fairy.
Sure. Sorry, I cut you off there. I don't know if you want to finish your thought there.
Well, just in terms of like that idea that like Aisha Kandisha, it still has power today. So like you can buy a talisman ring of Aisha Kandisha if one wanted to find a husband, if that was what one was after. You could do that. Really what I'm trying to say is that it's still in the kind of the lexicon of the kind of the modern Arabic or more broadly Islamic mind.
Amazing. Yeah. So much that again, all of these things. I'm definitely going to do a gin episode at some point. At some point, it's going to happen. But yeah, it's all incredibly fascinating. We could spend all day talking about this whole idea.
Totally. It's an unbelievable, such a big corpus there. It's huge.
So the front of your book says "Father of Witches." One of the epithets of the Dark Man is the Witchfather. Why is this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose it kind of goes back to this thing with like, there's the initiator and kind of those interrupted journeys, those interrupted lives, and essentially igniting the fire and the blood with those kind of apparitions or visions that people have. Or, there's another way of looking at that. Is it a more literal, expression? Is this a lineage thing? Again, you could toss a coin on that one. But I think the father of witches element, the witch father, is another epitaph. Like it is very much seen as this figure that initiates and leads one into the road, down the road of witchcraft.
Nice. I have to ask though, because we've been talking about all of this folklore. Why do you think there's so much folklore around the Dark Man? And to another point of that, like, why do you think there are so many geographical place names, not just in Ireland, Scotland, the UK, and Wales, or
Yeah.
sorry, England and Wales. But in North America, there's you just had to take a left, the devil's knee down the road. It's like there's just why are we just so enamored with this darkness and this kind of a dark figure, do you think?
Mm. I mean, starting with geographically, like folklore was often used to explain kind of anomalous things in the landscape, like strange shaped stones where, that's where the, Finn McCool fought the giants and they threw these boulders at each other. There's always kind of been that use of story to explain the landscape away. But I would also say that there is, you know, there is an element to areas of the landscape where strange things may have happened, and you will see it in the street names, like things like here you get like Hooky Lane, or Puck Lane. It's like these are names of fairies that are, I would say in the pay of the Dark Man, and it recurs repeatedly. I would also say that there is an element to this when we look at some of these areas. So things like, you where caves become the hellmouth,
Right. Yeah.
like and it's into the underworld and this kind of stuff. I think that's a post-Christian thing, where before that kind of the impact of Christianity and some of the kind of the inversion of what we hypothesize were pagan beliefs, the cave was one of these places that was initially sacred. We only have to look at the cave art, to see that these places were hugely important. They were very difficult to get to. Like the idea that like some of these caves, like Trois Frères in France, where, was some kind of like, Stone Age condo is crazy. It's like really difficult, very difficult places to get to. I mean, joking aside, I mean, the idea of caving now with modern equipment, like literally fills me with fear. Like just horrible idea. I don't know why anybody would do that.
Well, we all have that idea of like we watch the Flintstones and things like that.
Yeah.
Where it was just like an open grove where like you can just go in and it's like an amphitheater. It's like if you ever go caving, it's terrifying. It's
absolutely terrifying.
It's such a visceral,
mm-hmm.
strange feeling. Where I was very lucky to grow up in the Rocky Mountains, where there were places that I could just go caving, and there's ice and it's treacherous and it's
mm-hmm.
no wonder people went to these places to have these strange liminal experiences, because
exactly, even
with all of the trappings of a modern world, you still feel overwhelmed with the environment when you're in them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that to a degree that these cave places were some of our earlier places of worship, some of our earlier places where people had trance states experience, and that as humanity developed, they like certainly when I look at the Boyne Valley and you look at the passage tombs of Newgrange, Knowth, Dowth, Fornox, it's a replication of a cave, and like some of the thinking that, or some of the experiences that I've had, that other people I know have had, is this envision going into this cave, deep into the earth, and coming to a place that kind of some people call the dark womb, where it's this kind of like primordial waters of creation, where they will have some sort of interaction with him, and have often a kind of a experience of some meaning. But if it kind of gets into that thing where if you think of like, if there's a womb within, then the cave mouth is the vulva of the earth. Well, when Christianity came, that was turned into a hellmouth,
Yeah.
So you get all this kind of inversion, and like without kind of bashing Abrahamic faiths and kind of like, the kind of the removal of the potency of female sexuality and the female creative forces. That seems to be clearly what's happening,
Yeah.
And when you think of the Dark Man as well, is very much a potent sexual force. And in the accounts of Isabel Gowdy, they're very lurid and vivid of just orgiastic copulation with the Dark Man. Very much kind of an expression of kind of wild, unbridled female sexuality.
Yeah, let's head there then. References to the Dark Man in folkloric records, like what did they have to say about him? Because skeptics would look at all of this and just basically say, if it's that old expression, if the devil didn't exist, God would have, or men would have a need to create them or create him. So what does the Dark Man? How are they described through the folklore that you've looked through? We've talked a little bit about patterns, but let's talk about physical description and capability.
Yeah, okay.
What he can do or what it does.
So if we start with the Fenian cycle, which are a collection of stories, they're made up of 3 manuscripts. The first one being kind of a canon na Shanarach, which is the colloquially of ancients or old men. Well, that's actually the name of the script that encompasses the 3 texts. It's like 2 from the 15th century, the Book of Lishmore, Laud 610, and a third from Killiney, County Dublin, dating to the 17th century. But linguistic evidence in how this was documented takes it way back, to the 12th century. And then these manuscripts reflect a far, far older oral tradition. But it is the Fenian cycle is basically the story of the Fianna, who were kind of like, in terms of orientating people, they're kind of like knights of the round table, right? So they're warrior poets. They're noble. They do a hell of a lot of hunting, So the Fianna is the word Fianna gets its root from the word Fia, which means deer. So the deer is a hugely potent symbol in all of this, right? And is constantly, again, that's another one that comes with the Dark Man all the time. But Fionn McCool, he rises to being head of the band of warriors. And they've got kind of 2 main stories within. There's the pursuit of Dermot and Grania, and then there's Oisin and Tir na Nog. Tir na Nog means land of the young, so kind of fairyland essentially. But how the Dark Man is described in the stories of the Fianna is there's not a huge amount about him. He's essentially a kind of a marginal figure, but he has huge impact, right? He has huge impact. So for context, Oisin, his name literally means little deer. Okay. His mother is the fairy woman Saiva. Now, how she turns up in his father's life, which is Fionn McCool, he's out hunting with his dogs. They come across this fawn. The dogs are acting strangely with the deer. They're not attacking it. There's something weird about it. So Fionn essentially takes the deer back to his fort. That night, this beautiful woman enters his chamber, and she begs for him to protect her against this adversary, and he's absolutely besmitten. Well, she's a beautiful fairy woman, so there's going to be some glamour going on, obviously, and immediately falls in love with her and says, "I'll protect you, and whoever's your enemy is my enemy." And she describes this figure she calls the Black Magician of the Men of Gods, depending on what version of the story you read. Right. So here we have the dark appellation, right? We have reference to kind of occult prowess. And he said he turned me into this deer to trap me. But I knew the only way that this spell would be broken if I was under the protection of Fionn McCool. So there's this stipulation in the spell that it can only be broken if she's under the protection of this particular person, right? So the Dark Man is setting up this circumstances
right
as we go, right? Now, they immediately fall in love. They spend a wonderful time together, and they're man and wife instantly. Now, not long after that. As part of his honor code to the people who essentially pay tithes to him, he has to go and fight a raiding band of Vikings that have come up around Dublin. So off he goes, fight them, comes back, he's due to come back a couple of days later. So as a dutiful wife, she's standing on the battle ramparts of their fort, looking for him. She sees him coming up the road, runs outside the protection of the fort, and as soon as she gets to him, Fionn turns into the Dark Man, taps her on the head. Yeah, transo shape shifts, taps her onto the head with a hazel wand. She's gone, and she's never seen again. And Fionn wanders Ireland looking for her for 7 years, and then he finds this wild boy with a shock of blonde hair who looks a bit like Saiva, his long lost love. And Saiva Oisín tells a story of like, my mother was a deer, and she, was very loving to me. And sometimes this Dark Man would turn up, and he would berate the deer, but he brought food and fed me. And I lived in a place beyond the mist, beyond the cloud. It was beautiful. And now he's here in the earth realm. So Fionn figures out this is my son and takes him in, and Oisín grows to be a tremendous warrior and poet, and this beautiful man who, not long after, a fairy woman arrives called Niamh. They do, yeah. They're called Niamh Cianór, which means Niamh of the head of gold, and she basically tells Oisín, "You're going to be my husband." And Oisín's like, "Okay,
sure,
sounds good to me." And he goes off to fairyland with her, and after 3 years, they have 3 children, and he longs to come back to Ireland to see his father and the Fianna. And she gives him very strict instructions. You must not touch the ground. Don't touch the ground. You can't touch the ground when you return to Ireland. He understands this is the taboo. And he returns to Ireland looking for the Fianna. He can't find them. He sees a group of men trying to move a stone. I think it's a place called Thrush's Glen. And he leans over to help them. And as he does so, the saddle belt of his ride, his horse snaps, and he falls and touches the ground. He instantaneously ages 3 centuries. He's a very, very old man, and it's the age of St. Patrick, and he is taken to Patrick, where he then kind of recounts the stories of the Fianna, and they have these debates. I think it's called The Arguments is the name of the chapter, where occasionally Oisín basically calls the monks clerks and bell ringers, and he'd quite happily relieve their heads from their bodies and what have you. But this theme of woman being transformed into a deer, this happens a few times. It's quite noticeable. So, and it comes with, again, this dark figure. So the earlier version there I gave you of the Fianna, there's also a story of Oisín's conception, which goes back to the 12th century at least. And it's like a couple of marginal quatrains in the Book of Leinster. And Oisín's mother in this isn't called Saiva, she's called Bly Derrig. And she was in the form of a deer when Oisín was conceived. And then in the kind of the next element you have with this is when some of the Fianna come up against the god of the dead, or the Lord of the Dead, who's called Dondov, right? So Don, it means brown, but it also is kind of like, it's like also means noble as well, right? And dove, black, right? So we have the color appellation again. And he basically he tricks Colcha MacRonan, who's one of the Fianna, to come to his fort by sending him a fairy woman called Lady Mal in the form of a deer, who they chase in a hunt, and that leads them into the land of the dead, where they kind of negotiate what they negotiate. Yeah. And there's a poem called Fafland from the metrical Dinshaklis, which again is actually kind of a folkloric explanation of how places got their names. And there's again a description of this of woman transformed into fairy, or fairy woman transformed into a deer, and then these plots roll out. But several times in the different versions of the stories, he's referred to as the dark druid of the men of God, the black magician of the men of God. These kind of phrases. Now, the men of God is really important. So, because it's referring to the Tuatha Dé Danann,
Okay.
right? The people of the god, right? That's what they refer to, and that I hypothesize is the Daggada, right? Who seems to be kind of Odin-esque in for point of reference, people who aren't familiar with him. One of his titles is All-Ahur, which is cognate with All-Father. People would be familiar with that from kind of Norse mythology as an epithet for Odin. But he is within kind of the Tuatha Dé Danann, as you recall from a couple of weeks ago. We did this show on the within your Patreon.
Yeah, for people that are unaware, I have a Patreon, and Darragh was so great to come on and talk about the Tuatha Dé Danann. For those that don't know, I like the description of it's kind of like they're Ireland's immortals. They're this idea of a pantheon of gods within Ireland, and it's such a wonderful story. And Darragh did such a great job. I just have to say, Darragh, I could listen to you talk about folklore and myths forever.
Thanks, man.
I just love listening to them. But they're really fascinating stories. So when Darragh's talking about the Tuatha Dé Danann, just kind of the easy one to think of would be kind of like the Greek gods. Truly, it's like that's just what people. So sorry, Darragh, I interrupt you. I just wanted to put that.
No, not at all. Not at all. So we and in the story when we talk about kind of like the second battle of Moytura, one of the things that they're doing, and this is because epic kind of like forces of good versus forces of evil, kind of epic battle of and they gather all the kind of the best druids of the Tua to attack the Fomorians, and Daggada says basically, I'm better than all you guys. I can do it all. Right. Yeah. So, he's saying it very clearly. I'm the best magician here.
Right.
And so there you have this figure. And he's also referred to like he has the Don as well, right? So Don Dove and Daggada, there seems to be some overlap between the two of them, right? So. And Don can mean dark as well. In archaic Irish, it kind of could have meant dark as well. So there seems to be an overlap with these figures that have magic capability. They can shapeshift. The Daggada, if you'll recall from the Battle of Moytura, is very lascivious. And so there's a pattern there that these figures, these folkloric figures, are in some ways kind of like a description of a dark man-esque figure, but the pattern that we've identified earlier circles all of them. So you can have kind of a folkloric line between kind of like the dark magician, the fire dove, the Daggada, Don Dove. There seems to be kind of a current through it as well. There's another figure which I haven't put in the book called Crom Dove, which I hypothesize is something similar. Yeah.
What happens a little bit later on when we have you brought up the witch trials in which and I've got a little bit to say about that in a little bit here, but as we go forward through time, there are still descriptions of people meeting a dark figure, very somewhat specific elements that everybody talks about the attributes of the dark man. Can we talk about a few of those? I don't want to give away all of them, but very specific stuff. And it's just like, well,
I've pulled out a couple of references here, which I'll read to you. Firstly, that there's Andrew Man, just in terms of kind of what we were chatting about earlier about kind of this idea of hybrid children. So, Andrew Man was put on a trial at the age of 70. This is during the Great Scottish Witch Hunt between 1597 and 1598, and he during his trial, he confessed to having a sexual relationship with the Queen of Elfheim, and then begot diverse barns with her. So he had many children with the Queen of Elfheim. But I did a lot of research into the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft. It's a fantastic academic resource.
Such a good website. Yeah,
it's amazing.
crazy.
Yeah, and just went all through the accounts, and here's a couple of them. So the Dark Man isn't universally present in these accounts. In fact, there's a Green Man, which probably comes up not as frequently as the Dark Man does, but it's a whole different story. Let's not muddy the water with that, but just it's there. But
another episode, I guess. Why not? Just throwing episodes out everywhere.
But here's a few. Margaret Alexander, tried in 1647, referred to a man in black clothes who made her go forward. She also spoke of a man being the king of the fairies who she had sex with. When pressed, she described his physical nature as cold. Her faith is unknown.
Cold, yeah.
So the cold thing comes up again and again. Yeah. Margaret Allen, tried in 1661, had a servant testify they saw a black man go into Margaret's room and appear to move around like he had hooves. So we've got the black man, we've got the composite being. Margaret was banished. Thomas Black, tried in 1661, said the devil appeared to him at night when he was in bed. He went on to describe the devil lying upon him heavily in the shape of a man, and Thomas was executed by strangulation and burning. So the interrupted journey, the interrupted experience.
Right. Yeah.
And that the weight on somebody, that comes up quite frequently in being hag-ridden and all that kind of night terrors, that kind of thing. Agnes Clarkson was tried in 1642 and spoke of how her home was filled with a black mist when she first refused to join the devil. When questioned as to how she renounced her baptism, she explained how this was done with carnal dealings with the Dark Man. Her faith is unknown. Margaret Jackson, tried in 1677, described the devil as a black man with a bluish band, white cuffs, and hoggers, which are kind of leg covers. He wore no shoes and had cloven feet. She was visited in bed by a spirit that looked like her dead husband, shape-shifting. Yep. And she later realized it was the devil. Margaret was executed by strangulation and burned. And then finally, widow Christian Patterson, tried in 1661, said the devil changed from a beast to a man to get into bed with her. She gave a detailed account of sex with him. I couldn't actually find that account, unfortunately, but she was executed by strangulation. And of course, then there's Isabel Gowdy.
Yeah, Isabel's it's just
the big one.
Yeah, it's the big one. Yeah. I just released a Patreon episode on a very specific case of three people that were basically executed and one person who died under a different circumstance. And I was very fascinated while I was reading this, because this was all of this stuff was done under torture. Like these people were tortured, and most likely they were fed stuff, right? They were fed stuff. But there's this one where this person was interviewed, and then there was an inquisition, and then her daughter was questioned. And her daughter basically threw her mother under the bus by basically saying that like everything that this other person said happened at this dark ritual happened. Right. But then she's like, this 7-year-old who I'm pretty sure they didn't torture. I'm sure they were feeding her information. But then she said she gave the details exactly as somebody else had. So again, fed. But then she also just said, oh, by the way, there was also this dark, sinister, black, dark, sinister man there. And every other detail was the same except for, and there was a dark man. There was the devil was there. Mm-hmm. And then there's this other thing there. And it's just like, is this, we can talk about archetypes all we want, I'm sure, but this figure seems to get around. It's this thing has some kind of currency, and it's still very fascinating to me. And I think why I was so enamored with the fact that you wrote a whole book about it, because it doesn't fit in. This book is not just another book about the devil. This is something that seems a little bit more specific to not just your heritage, but to to a specific kind of folklore and a specific kind of way that people used to be in the world. And I'm gonna hone in on this for a little bit more. I like one part of the book where you said that due to a certain kind of guidance, you logged off of all social media because the virtual worlds were robbing you from the somewhat more natural ones. So the Dark Man seems to have a lot to do with land. We've already talked about that, but how is this relationship between Dark Man and land? Can we make it a little bit more clear for people? Like, is the Dark Lord or the Dark Man, the Dark One? Is this more of like a remembrance that we're getting too far away from the land, or is it a reminder? What do you think this relationship speaks to?
That's a great question. Like from my experience.
By the way, you're not missing anything on social media as well. You're not. Good call. However, you made it. Like,
I think it's innately tied to nature, and I think we get that in how it presents, and going back to the cave I mentioned, the Trois Frères cave, Henry Brule was this like amateur archaeologist, a Catholic priest who discovered this cave in France, and basically found this really interesting piece of cave art, and it was I think it was also carving as well, and essentially it's approximately dated to about 13,000 BC, and this figure, he called it the sorcerer, right? He
called it the sorcerer.
It has antlers, it has bear paws, it has owl eyes. It looks like it's got like human legs, but kind of like a deer's torso. It's got a fine pair of testicles hanging there as well. But there was a whole lot of thing about this work. Kind of like Margaret Murray at the time was kind of saying, "Oh, this is the first kind of picture of a deity and what have you." Not that far away in France is another cave called Grotte de Gabliot. I'm pronouncing that dreadfully, but it also has a figure that's called the sorcerer, which is similar. It's a composite being. So we have, again, we're in the cave, right? We're seeing this composite being, and I hazard that this manifestation is a representation of the primal creative forces of nature. Okay. That it is showing, it is everything. It is all of these different creatures at once. That is a composite of all these things. Isabel Gowdy talks about how the Black John, as she called him, turned up as she calls it a ray in the manuscript, which is a reference to a roe deer. Sometimes he had booties on, sometimes he had cloven feet. Sometimes he came in the form of a dog. Right. So it is all these aspects of nature, and I think within there is a non-dualistic metaphor that it is displaying where I am all these things, and you are too. That initiation into witchcraft, which, depending on which way you want to go with it, one could argue is a nature-based religion. I already regret saying that for the shit I'm going to get. But calm your jets if you're out there. Don't worry about it.
Even if you tried to attack him on social media, he's got you. You can't get to him.
Can't get me if I'm not there.
That's right.
But also, like, you think about that initiation into witchcraft and what happens. People talk about the shifting. Isabel Gowdy talks about it. Her and her coven transforming into crows, transforming into hares for whatever mischief they would enact. So it seems to be an initiation into a wider human experience that is far more integrated with nature. Now, I must caveat, when we say nature, we as kind of modern people tend to have a very kind of like hippie cosmic version of what what nature is. We're kind of like, I'm going to go.
I like
Like,
camping because I get to go out into nature.
yeah,
Like,
I'm wild swimming.
that's right.
Yeah. So, but realistically, what is the face of nature? It's tooth and fang. It's life feeding on life. And this is where we get the challenge of like, is the dark man evil? Because the dark man is going to make you look at your own face, your real face, but it's also going to show you the true face of nature. So I would wager that challenge and all it brings gets twisted into this kind of like evil matrix, space, but in fact it's no more evil than a tiger is. Like you ask you ask an antelope on the African plains if a lion's evil. Do you know what I'm getting?
Yeah, no.
I know it's going to be a bit of a muddy point, but I think that's what we're looking at, is that this representation of all these different forms,
Right.
pulled together, is showing you kind of like this potent face of like the living consciousness of nature that is integrally tied to the land. And those that we're part of that. We're not separate from nature. We're absolutely part of it.
I think a lot of people, one of the reasons that, and I'm not going to try and say that they're one and the same, but a lot of people who have uh, that sleep paralysis demon thing that everybody
Yeah.
that like talks about is just everybody talks about how much of a gut punch that it is, and just how clear it was for them. And that kind of an experience, I think, is one of those ones that it gets to what we could probably call like the deeper aspect of ourselves, that part that we've kind of like kept under wraps for so long. Because each person that sees that figure of the sleep paralysis demon or the night hag or whatever it's called is just they remember it for the rest of their life, it's just so visceral to them. I don't know why I'm tying that in with nature, but it's one of those things that you can't ignore it. It's just so plaintively clear to you. And I think that we've done this really wonderful job these days of being able to separate ourselves out from what we call nature and what we call like the natural world and things like that. But it's just something that exists all around us all the time. And anyways, I'm very wishy-washy right now with trying to draw how night hags and nature are the same, but just it's yeah. I'm gonna stop there before I make too much of a fool of myself. But yeah, it's odd when we do this thing where we separate ourselves from nature, as you said. There's this, it's tooth and fang, and you have brought in this idea of the dark man as kind of an agent of disruption and, to use your words in the book, chaos. How do you define chaos and its relationship to figures that we call tricksters?
Yeah. I mean, chaos is often kind of like a slightly not the right word, because when we get into kind of the idea of like forces of chaos being again associated with evil, and
Right.
Forces of order being associated with light and what have you. But it's super interesting, because it goes right back to this whole thing of like, to the point you were describing, right? Of you always remember that experience with the night hag,
Yeah.
right? Right. Equally with the dark man's interjection. So going back to the interrupted journey, it's an ontological shock.
Yeah.
So your view of the world's turned on its head. And I think the trickster element to it is very similar, right? So I talk about kind of like the, what you call it, the footprints in the snow in Exeter in the kind of the 1900s, right?
Right.
Where it's like 50 miles of snow, of footprints, clove footprints in snow. They go up and down buildings, right? It's inexplicable. People are like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like all of a sudden the devil is alive and well in southwest England, and if it is, some jokesters doing this, I would say they're very much the their daemons are working overtime for them, to realize that current.
Yeah.
But there's two kind of pieces that I talk to about kind of the trickster energy within folkloric pieces. Well, one's more folkloric, one's kind of more of a kind of strange phenomena that happened in London in the Victorian era. But I talk about kind of the Pied Piper, right? And what he represents in Germany. Now the Pied Piper turns up at a mysterious time. There's actually one element I should actually mention with this as well that was a recurrent thing. Certainly with the witch trials experiences, that people who came up against the Dark Man often witnessed the Dark Man often happened after a period of trauma.
Yeah.
So someone died, reduced to poverty, and then this experience happened. So there's this town is infested. Town of Hamlin's infested with rats. It's awful. The mayor hires the Pied Piper, who mysteriously appeared, dressed in his strange diamond uniform, with possession of a just a very handsome man who had this silver flute, and that kind of silver flute has connotations of kind of like, fairy, and he's hired. He demonstrates mastery over the natural world, over animals, by driving the rats into the river, following his music. The mayor reneges on his deal, and they are punished horrifically because of this transgression. So absolutely horrifically, where Pied Piper demonstrates his mastery over human beings and plays a song, and all the children are led away, and they're led away to a mountain nearby, which is into a cave in the mountain, where the wall opens up and there's some sort of land behind it, and they disappear into it. And a lame child who's kind of following behind but can't keep up with the rest of the dancing children as they disappear, recounts the cave walls opening up, and he disappears through. And that cave was apparently used for pagan rites. There's a hypothesis the cave was used for pagan rites. But then it's renamed like Calvary, where Christ was crucified. So again, this the inversion thing as well. So it hints at something earlier there may have taken place. So that's a big one, right? He comes in, he turns the kind of the authorities on their head, right? So he flips all of that around. He shows their corruption to them. He punishes them all in the most horrendous way. Now, the later one I talk about is Spring Heel Jack. So
I kind of wanted people to discover that in the book, but it's such a, and when I first started, people have to understand, Darragh was one of the ones who he in great confidence sent me his book before it was published, and I had a chance to read it, and I was just, as I was reading, I was like, oh man, I really hope that Darragh brings up Spring Heel Jack, and he did. It was like, oh yes. Yes. Anyhow, if you feel like talking about the phenomena of spring, it's such a strange period of time.
It's so weird.
Yeah,
it's just such a weird story, and like for those of you not familiar with Spring Heel Jack, he's this kind of like devilish anomaly who turned up in London,
Victorian supervillain.
Yeah. It turned up in London, but also kind of further afield in the UK, who could kind of like bounce 12 feet into the air, which hence spring heeled. And he attacked young women several times, terrifying these women. They recounted a couple of things. One, he kind of was able to blow this blue smoke out of his mouth,
belches
kind of
them.
Blinded them temporarily, and that his touch was ice cold.
He would scratch them too. A lot of the women
scratched them as well. Yeah. So it was this kind of beastly creature. So there's a couple of details like that. But the primary thing about this that I found interesting was the period of time it happened in. It was like the peak of the British Empire. Britain was the most powerful military, naval, and kind of economic force on the earth.
No other nation came anywhere close.
Not even close, right? And yet, so much of that empire was built on kind of these British values of kind of rationality and kind of, really development of kind of Enlightenment values, and have taken them huge strides forward in kind of academic thinking and rationality. And indeed, that was some of the thinking that kind of allowed, well, not allowed, but was used as almost an excuse to bring British values and culture to people who didn't want it.
But the British said that they needed it. It was for their own good.
Exactly. It was for their own good. They shipped off these values across the world and colonized multiple areas of the world. And yet at the same time, in their capital city, there was a devil running amok, terrifying the populace who wouldn't leave their houses. Exactly the same circumstances where they would, guffaw and at populations of some of these countries that they invaded. So this peak time where kind of British civility and rationality was a justification for this imperialism, it was being turned on its head in London by this bugaboo, and one of the most amazing accounts is that you have a place called Aldershot Garrison in the southeast of England, which essentially is the garrison that is the most important military site, or it's the biggest, right? So it's like, it has something like 10,000 troops there. It's like fucking huge, right? A massive military site. And they were attacked on numerous occasions by Springhill Jack, who would come bounding out of the darkness,
right,
slap a sentry, and then bound off back. And they were like firing after him, didn't know what the hell was going on. And this happened several times. And again, some of these sentries reported touch was ice cold to the touch. Same thing Isabel Gowdy said, ice cold to the touch.
Yeah.
Same thing they said about Master Leonard. And that demonic figure who seems to be the similar thing.
Yeah, incredible.
So, but it always seems to be about upsetting orthodoxy.
Yeah,
and that it's almost, it's like a reminder of like, you're not in control. Actually,
humbling, kind of almost.
Yeah, and it's a reminding of a bigger force.
Mm-hmm.
Force of nature that is, that it's almost like that. And that's what I meant about kind of chaos and order. Is I get it, but I feel like a better description for this force is almost civilization versus wildness,
right?
Wildness and letting the kind of the forces of orthodoxy and kind of authority know that they don't have everything locked down.
Yeah. Speaking of a real Victoria boogeyman, now you're totally welcome to say no, because I know that it might be a reason for people to want to grab the book. But let's talk a bit of magic if you want
Mm-hmm.
to. But a Victorian boogeyman that we all know and love by the name of Aleister Crowley. Dark Man and Aleister Crowley. What's going on there? Can you share anything, or is it one of those things that we should just tease and then tell everybody to buy the book? Or
I mean, this is my own kind of view on it. Where in with the whole thing about the receiving of the Book of the Law, right? Kind of over in Cairo, 1904. Yeah. Crowley's told. I don't think I should need to explain this to this audience. They probably were very, very aware of that story. But over 3 days, you're going to receive the Book of the Law, and he was told he'd hear this voice over his left shoulder. Yeah. And he sat down and he got the impression of this dark figure in the room behind him over his left shoulder, right, of this tall, kind of noble, he said kind of Persian king type description, which he called Aiwass in the Equinox. But he later referred to it in theory, in magic and theory and practice. He was resolute in identifying Aiwass as the devil, as Lucifer, as Satan, who's the hermaphrodite goat Baphomet was a symbol, which again, composite being.
Yeah.
So that there seems to be something there, and then there's another argument as well, in Cairo, that type of description, one could argue there's a manifestation of a Jinn king that probably is part of the same current, but manifests in a different way, given where they are in the world. So yeah, there's something there as well.
There is. I want to pull this string, although we've kind of teased at it a little bit. You quote Peter Gray's Apocalyptic Witchcraft by saying,
Yeah.
Peter says, most of our history is chronicled by our enemies. First of all, what does this mean to you, and what you understand of the deeds of the Dark Man? You bring up very interesting characters in your book, and I truly do hope that people do grab the book. One of them being, actually, no, I'm just going to leave it there. So, who are these enemies that you, Peter, are trying to identify, and how does it relate to how you understand your history specifically?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. I think in the most literal sense, we talk about kind of our history is documented by our enemies is broadly talking about the witch trial records and what have you, right? I mean, these traditions have been very secretive for the reasons that the penalties will cost you your life. And in some areas of the world, they still do. But I think it comes down to that kind of tension between a human desire to control, to control the world around them, to control nature, to put nature under the yoke of the human mind and human endeavor. And we look at the Abrahamic world in terms of like the Bible quote, and I don't know the quote verbatim, but like, I've given you the plants and animals of the world to use.
Right.
That kind of intimates a mastery and an ownership. Whereas I think that the Dark Man and aspects of the Dark Man's current are reminding, and I think Peter Gray talks about this in Apocalyptic Witchcraft, is that we have a covenant with nature, and that balance that we've had with nature. And look at kind of like all the kind of like Celtic festivals, I mean, the harvest festivals, and the key moments of the kind of the agricultural calendar, or the calendar of like of animal rearing and what have you. There's always kind of bargains going on with this. We're working with the natural world. We have a dance with the natural world, and we're beholden to what the natural world can throw at us. It'd be that kind of like inclement weather and what have you. So that there was a covenant in our behavior. We were always kind of, but how I kind of phrase in the book is like, pray for salvation, but kind of bargain with the devil for life, to hedge one's bets. But and that's something I think that we have forgotten, and that ties back into that kind of getting kind of closer to nature in whatever way you can in your life. It's not obviously not everyone has access to that kind of stuff, but I think that's what it is. I think it's a reminder that kind of you are like part of nature. You are a wild thing, and that kind of orthodoxy and rigid structures are not necessarily your natural environment. That's what I mean. He upsets the apple cart. He reminds you that the world is not sterile. It's not utterly under the yoke of modernity. It's absolutely not. You only have to look at how we have an obsession with the paranormal now. Like it goes absolutely perpendicular to what you would say, the modern zeitgeist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. The more this is not a wow, everybody look at how smart I am statement, but the proliferation of the interest in the paranormal and UFOs and things like that. I was like, all of our stories are about people with superpowers, paranormal ability. Like it's what makes up the tapestry of our imagination right now is magic and the occult, whether by different names, but it's still magic and the occult. I have to ask you this, but like what this is not in before I do a show, I always have a question sheet that I give all of my guests, just to let them know.
You're so much more professional than me, Doug.
I like what you do with your podcast, Darragh, because it's really off the cuff, and I like how people have fresh answers, because that to me allows, particularly for practitioners, allows people to see just how on the surface or at the tip of somebody's tongue the way that they perceive the world is, whereas my stuff is like people have to think about it usually before they answer, and they have had time to, but I have to ask you, is the manifestation you think of the dark man these days pretty much the same? I know a lot of people are saying that they meet dark figures, and even Aidan Wachter on one of my shows, he talked about how he was in a bookshop, and I might be misquoting him, and I hope I'm not, but he had a dream or something that he was at a bookshop and there was a dark figure there. So
he got zapped by him.
Yeah, does the dark
does
the dark man still appear as the dark man? When you're talking to the people that you talk to on your podcasts, because you also have interviews with people in the book. That's another thing that people need to realize about Darragh's book is it's split into two parts. They're both excellent. They both really flesh out the dark man really, really well. Does the dark man still appear as the dark man to people? Is this what you've come up with? Yeah.
It does. But it again, it's like there's no original form. Right? Like it's absolutely unbound. Like Joe Hickey Hall had a fantastic show a while back where someone talked about a dark motorcycle rider, and like having this kind of like really, really kind of strange, profound experience with this dark motorcycle rider that appeared out of nowhere. Ryan Foxwood, and when he was on, when I did get an interview with him, he talked about again like as he was doing some work about the dark man, dark guy in a motorbike drives by, like, you know, this kind of like potent symbol. So it's you know, it's not bound by time and space. It's not going to always turn up like 16th century Scottish lord, right? You know, it will take whatever form it feels is necessary, or I don't know. It can't keep projecting into consciousness, but I mean, I think there's a certain amount where it will manifest in a way that will have an impact on you. You know, that it's able to kind of read your cultural, religious lexicon and play that back to you in a way that's going to have an impact. You know, when I saw him, it was an angelic form.
Okay.
It scared the living shit out of me.
But would you say that though is the primary characteristic of it was not so much its deed but its appearance? Was it a darkness? What like, because I know I'm hanging on the term dark as in black, but like what was this thing that you experienced? What was dark about it, Darragh?
It was a jet black silhouette of a large muscular angel against a background of fire.
Oh, that's pretty metal. Yeah,
it was pretty metal.
Sorry if I'm trying to like relativize this incredible experience.
Yeah,
no, like as much as I would like to hang on to your experience, I mean, these experiences are very personal, and I had an instance recently where somebody kind of was like, they wanted to ask me more about how I experienced certain things within Solomonic rituals. And I feel sheepish about it because I understand why people want to understand these personal experiences that you have that are very, very intense. But I don't know if it's some kind of like intellectual gag reflex that you have, where it's like, I don't feel like I need to explain to you.
Yeah.
Not because I'm being a dick, but
Yeah.
and not because I think you wouldn't understand. It's just that it's something so personal about it. Like that experience was for me. and I'm not trying to say that what you're doing is spiritual rubbernecking, but the relation of this experience as just a story might tend to belittle it in some way. It's not for you. and
Yeah.
and I don't want to share every aspect of it. So forgive me if it feels like I'm holding stuff back. So I don't know if you can relate to that at all in any way, Darragh, but
Well, I mean, I couldn't talk about what happened to me for about 3 months.
yeah.
Like I and it was through the help of some amazing, some amazing women who helped and guided me through it, and and were there when I needed to kind of go, what the fuck just happened, and help me through that. And as you said, it's a deeply personal thing to write about. And I know there's a certain amount of exposure that goes with that, where people will just go bullshit or whatever and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. And that is something that is just something I have to wear. It's not pleasant, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But where I see the benefit to this, and kind of, as you said, the second half of the book is practitioners talking about their experiences, and people who just, it's happened to them, like one experience, like Jessica Mitchell, she talks about meeting this like 9-foot 2D man on the top of Glastonbury Tor,
Of all places.
yeah, who asks her for a cup of tea and a cigarette at like 3 a.m. in the night, right? So, and then talks about like this feeling, this predatory energy coming off him, like, and what a transformative experience it was for her. So the reason I think the kind of collation of these type of experiences, or some of it is just like a knowledge download, but others are kind of like, this is what happened to me. The reason I think it's important is it gives a map of some description to people who maybe have had these experiences and are not exposed to kind of the occult world, and are literally going, I know what the fuck is going on, and it's something to help to interpret what's happening, what may be happening, and that's why I kind of volunteered that information, and it's not something I share lightly, it genuinely isn't, and it's one of those things that you're kind of aware of. Someone's they're going to think I'm fucking nuts, like, but it is what it is, and essentially I talk about it in the book that this is my bit of being in the grip of the daemon. This is what it is. Like, about 3 years ago when this all started, I had the experiences prior to that, but like, I was like, I know I wanted to do a book, and I had two ideas of what books I was going to do. So I'm going to explore some of this Dark Man stuff. No idea what the structure was going to be. The other was, I was thinking about a collection of essays with my photographic work. So kind of like a travel log mixed with kind of the esoteric and the occult and the paranormal, kind of the various different adventures and misadventures I've had over the years.
You got some good stories, I have to say.
Yeah, cheers, man. But and I did some divination on that, and it was just like Dark Man, Dark Man, Dark Man. So like, in a way, without trying to sound pompous and kind of up my own arse about it, like, I don't really have that much choice.
Yeah.
This had to come out for me personally. I'm not saying the world was waiting. Finally, Darragh's book is out. I'm not saying that. I mean, I had to get it out.
Yeah. There's so many books about the devil, and when I did the episode on the devil, trying to choose which book about the devil I should read was so tiresome, and because they all seem to say the same thing, and this was one of those things where I was like, oh, okay, so we're talking about something. We're talking about a manifestation of something that has been perceived as being the devil. This is more. This is more in line with the kind of thing that the people that listen to my podcast need to take on board. Less so that that devil that gets told to everybody in Sunday school is bad. There's an other aspect of these kinds of figures that I think that can be onboarded practically. So in that vein, Darragh, for those curious, because I know there's going to be folks who listen to this episode who will get your book and they'll be like, yep, sign me up. I want to meet the Dark One. What would you say to those people? What would you recommend to them before they proceed? Would you warn them about anything? Do you go looking for the Dark Man, or do they go looking for you? Like what is the information that you can relay so much so within a podcast episode that is just like, keep this in mind?
Well, I would say, first off, this isn't a grimoire. It's not a how to.
No, it's not.
And that's above my pay grade. I think that there's this. If that's something that someone is drawn to do, then tread carefully. People who did this were called cunning people for a reason.
Yeah.
They have to understand how to navigate this. You're talking about primeval forces that probably have no understanding of what it means to be human. Certainly not what it is to exist in a human society. So I would say tread carefully and earn your stripes first before you kind of go jumping into those areas. But there, I mean, if that's something that people want to pursue, there's fabulous resources out there. Robin Arson, I think, is phenomenal. Gemma Gary, to name a few. There's lots more. I would also say that you'll probably get your shoulder tapped. If this is something that you're kind of wanting to explore, you may have already had your shoulder tapped.
Yeah.
If you haven't had your shoulder tapped, there might be a good reason for that. Maybe you should cool your jets. Do your research first.
Well, on that whole thing, I think that what you did was probably one of the best ways of engaging with this. Is that you did the legwork, Darragh. You went through the folklore, and part of the process of writing this book was, and I don't want to sound a hoity-toity, but part of the process what you did in the writing of this book was an interaction with the Dark Man, whether you liked it or not, or whether you thought
100%.
at the time that was what was happening. And I mean, you seem to have come out the other side okay. You've got a product, right? Like that, and you've had your world shaken quite a bit.
Christ.
There's the stuff that you've written in the book, and then there's the stuff you've said to me when the mics haven't been on, and you've gone through an actual transformative process. You have had an interaction with whatever this Dark One is. Have you not?
Yeah. I mean, like my worldview is utterly transformed, utterly changed. I mean, we hinted at that earlier on in the show. Like, what do you believe now? It's like what I would consider as a possibility now, I would have never have considered 3 years ago. Like, I would have laughed, if people proposed that kind of stuff. That's what I mean about like the ontological shock. My understanding of the world is completely different. And it's far more an enchanted and wild world. You know, and I mean that in the wilderness sense, not just, you know, spring break sense. You know, and very much that the dark man is part of my life now. You know, it's part of my daily practice, and it means an awful lot to me. You know, but I would say, you know, when I talk about kind of tooth and fang, and equally to your point about if somebody's interested in pursuing this, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt, because an ontological shock like that isn't easy. You know, and once the minute you think you've got things pinned down is, quite frankly, when you're fucked, right? Like that's it, you are going to face your shadow.
Yeah.
Like that's part of it. That's part of the journey. And on that positive note,
oh yeah. Well, Darragh, you've written a fantastic book, and I'm not just saying that because you asked me to read it before it came out. It was, as I say before, there's more nuance to the discussion of dark currents within Western culture that is just those apart from dualistic thinkings of right and wrong, good and evil, chaos and order. And there is no better personification of that than this idea of the dark man. That is the true upsetter, and it's a wonderful ride. And I'm so glad that he decided to use you as the conduit in which to share his experience. And I'm so glad that we have this for people to read. And I would really love if everybody, if any part of this was interesting to you, I truly think that you need to grab this book. Darragh, tell us about where people can grab it. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
Tell the folks, where can they get? Is it out yet? It's.
There's been a couple of copies. People have told me they've found out there. So I think it's definitely kind of out there. Officially, it's the 6th of August when it's released in North America, and then I think it's the 12th of September when it's rest of the world.
Okay.
But it's with Inner Traditions. You can find it on their site or on Amazon. All the kind of usual book places you'd expect. But I should add, I'm very grateful for you reading it, because you wear one of my shit tests. I was like, okay, this is if Doug likes it, then I know I'm okay. I'm on something. So thank you very much for providing that benchmark for me.
No worries.
But yeah, it's kind of in all the usual places, and I've got a few copies here. It's an amazing feeling to finally see it, you know, out of the imaginal into the material, which is a wonderful thing.
The foreword is by Peter Mark Adams. Can you tell us? You don't have to, but can you tell us how Peter came to do the introduction to this book?
Yeah, sure. It was, you know, I mean, Peter's been writing about kind of Saturnian currents for some time, and one of the people who helped me a lot kind of process what I was going through, and we did an awful lot of meditation work, a huge amount of meditation work, where a lot of stuff would come out, right? That kind of would come in vision and what have you. With a friend of mine, Michelle DeVezes, who's deeply psychic, but she helps people really kind of make sense of what's happening to them and develop their skill. That's kind of, you know, her calling. She's incredibly psychically gifted. And I was walking home from a place not too far by, and I was just thinking, I got to get my introduction done. Maybe I should ask. And I'd spoken to Peter Mark Adams a couple of times after we'd recorded shows for my podcast, and I'd mentioned that he mentioned to me at the time his next project. He was starting off Sanctum of Kronos, his book about the Hagia Sophia, and I was kind of saying, well, I'm thinking about doing this thing about kind of the dark man, you know, of the Lord of the Witches Sap. And he was, oh, interesting. You should check out kind of Andrew Chumley's stuff. And anyway, that was it. And kind of anyway, I'm walking down the road, and I'm like, I should ask Peter if he'd do the introduction for me. And equally, I didn't know Peter well at the time.
No.
And just I'm thinking that I get a voicemail from Michelle going, You should ask that Saturn guy to do the intro for you. You know your man Peter. You should ask him. Like, I'm like, okay. I'm like, there you go. I got buzzed.
Yeah.
So I email him. So would this be something of interest? Totally understand if it's not suitable. And he's like, I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
And months into the project, and I got a huge amount of support from Peter. He gave me an awful lot of guidance in terms of like what to expect from kind of like what time you're going to need, how to approach, kind of very, very kind of just gentle mentorship and a lot of help. And he asked me at one stage, we're about kind of halfway through the project, like, what did you ask me? And I was like, what kind of, I was thinking I should ask you. Then my psychic friend told me to ask you. I was like, what about you? And he was like, yeah, kind of the same, So it taps into that whole kind of like Saturnian current, that we're in that kind of territory, but he wrote a tremendous introduction.
He did.
Really, really good essay.
It's a fantastic, a really wonderful way to kick off the whole book. And I'll just say this, and I know you're in agreement, Peter. We're so lucky to be alive right now and to have Peter alive at this moment. Like, as far as like superstars, Peter is up there. I hadn't experienced
scholarly, visionary work.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. I truly think we're living in the best times for magic, and the fact that people like Peter are alive and writing, and you can talk to them fairly easily is just like it's the most
incredible.
Yeah,
Sanctum of Cronus is incredible.
I know.
Truly amazing book.
Yeah, I didn't realize before I had him on the show just how brilliant and involved he is, and it's intimidating, but he is not an intimidating person. He's very wonderful. Anyway, I could talk till the cows come home just about how amazing even doing one episode with Peter was. It's something I'll never forget. Darragh, what's next for you? Any more books? What's going on here?
Well, I'm so my podcast Spirit Box.
Yes.
I'm back on the airwaves after a 3-month sojourn. What's next is probably a bit of a kind of a book tour for this title, a digital one, obviously, and I'm thinking I'm kind of maybe going to look into doing some short films, doing some little films. I did a small piece with Peter actually, and Gas Bouchette's work, amazing photography, which was a lot of fun. So I've got a couple of ideas that are kind of formulating there. There may be another book. I got to take my time. This one took a lot out of me, to be honest.
When I had a chance, just because. It was the new year, and I was like, I just want to have a talk with Darragh. And so we just had a conversation, and I hope I'm not revealing too much, but you spent 15 minutes basically saying this experience was awful. It just took it out of me. It was punishing. And I was like, the things that happened to you, it's like, no, just the writing. The writing was, it's an ordeal.
Oh, I honestly felt like I was being fucking driven like a rental car. It was just like, Jesus, it's like, take your foot off the gas, fucking hell, I mean there were times where, like, if I'm honest, like I would say some of the best chapters came really, really quickly. And it just it flowed from wherever it came from. But when that happened, I'd be exhausted afterwards. Like, I have to go to bed at 6 p.m. like totally shattered, and literally claiming, "Fucking take it easy, give me a break. Can you just switch it off for a bit now and let me just sleep?" Right, Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier about things don't understand what it's like to be human, right? So sometimes you have to navigate that, like. But there may be another book. I mean, stuff sort of kind of ideas and kind of other things that I was kind of spotting in the kind of folklore and some of the folk traditions around pretty much around the puka and the etymology of that word and how it represents this kind of wild man spirit that exists in these mass traditions all over Europe. right? Like you find these kind of like, the kind of the wassail plays that happen around between harvest time and just after Christmas. It seems to be going to stretch out over quite a lot of periods. So there's always kind of like weird mask stuff going
Yeah.
on, which I think is something to do with kind of the trickster side of this energy.
That would be awesome.
So,
I'd love to.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Then again, you're inviting trickster energy into your life, so
I would love to see that. Oh, that'd be great. Darragh, tell folks about Spirit Box. So it's back on the air. You're doing some things. Is it one of those things where it's going to be every week, every 2 weeks? How often is it? Just
every 2 weeks? Yeah, every 2 weeks. Just kind of conversations with practitioners or people who've had strange experiences and what have you. So we look folklore, kind of magic, and everything in between. A Patreon where people can hear me witter on about the gin for other things and lots of Irish folklore.
I want more gardening videos. I've got one request.
I will. I've definitely got one in the pipeline for you.
When you drop the gardening videos, I literally stop everything. Like, I'm going to spend some time with Darragh in his garden. I love them. They were my favorite. I love the gin stuff, but I'm a sucker for gardening. I like
Come for the Spirit Box, they stay for the gardening tips.
Right. That's right. Darragh, where can people find all of your work? Where can they find all of the places, Spirit Box and everything else? You're on Instagram as well.
I'm on Instagram. Yeah, Instagram is kind of my only place, and on Patreon. But you can Darragh Mason. Just Google Darragh Mason, and you'll find me. I've got a portfolio side of my photography, and that links off to kind of Insta and Patreon. So I'm also on YouTube. Actually, I should add. So as Spirit Box Podcast, and that's where I'm at.
Perfect. Darragh, this has been so lovely. Congratulations on getting this book out here. And I don't say this often because there's a lot of occult books being produced all the time. People don't realize that it's publishing occult books. It's a big industry. Like it's not it's not huge, but it's big. It's big enough. And there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm not saying it's all crap, but I'm saying a lot of it is very samey. Thank you so much for producing something that is not samey and is utterly unique. Those are the books that I gravitate towards. So thank you for
producing something very kind,
very unique, and for being a friend of the show, and for helping me recently in London. I actually got to hang out with Darragh. We went to a pizza shop somewhere in Smithfield, and it was like I don't know. Remember that part of Ghostbusters where there's that swirling from the sky and it's coming right down into the center of Manhattan? That's what was happening in Smithfield when Darragh and I were eating at this pizza place. Just kidding. No, it was a very lovely time, and I was so lucky to be able to meet with you and to have your sister.
Yeah, and likewise, it was great. It was, and you got the most amazing weather when you were in London as well.
I know. I brought the sunshine. It was hot. Yeah. I couldn't believe how hot it was.
It was really, really nice.
Yeah.
It's fucking awful now.
Oh man, sorry, because I left. Anyhow, Darragh, please keep writing. I'm just going to say that. Keep creating. Actually, don't keep writing. Just keep creating. Truly, I think you've got a very unique and distinct voice, and we need more of those in this somewhat. I'm not going to say stagnant occult waters, but I've there's more people doing the same stuff and less people doing their own thing. And so when people do produce their own thing, it's a wonderful thing. I will have links as to all of the places to find Darragh's work, as well as, very obviously, a link for where to purchase Darragh's book, Song of the Dark Man, Father of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads. That will be at the specific episode of The Dark Man at whatmagicisthis.com. For this one, there's not going to be a ton of show notes. Grab Darragh's book. There's lots of notes in the back as far as places to go and further investigations to have. Darragh is right. This is not a grimoire. This is not a how to summon the Dark Man book, but it is still a book well worth your attention and certainly worth reading. And Darragh is also a very good writer. Something I didn't mention in this episode is Darragh is actually a very gifted writer, and which is why I want to see him write a little bit more. All right. You know what time it is, everybody. So this is when I tell each and every one of you how you can support what I do here at What Magic Is This? Because if you think that I'm doing something kind of cool and something special and you'd like to show your support in any way, shape, or form, I've got 3 really good ways of doing that, or for you to be able to do that. So let's talk about the one that I always talk about. So that is Patreon. So patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. You can find any number of the support me on Patreon buttons there. I've posted them everywhere. There's almost more support me on Patreon buttons than there actually are other things. Just kidding. It's not true. Suffice it to say, I would love to see you support me on Patreon. It's only $7 a month. It gives you access to all kinds of interesting content and offerings. I do shows about entities like spirits, saints, angels. I did an episode about gnomes. It was really cool. It's actually one of my favorite episodes, truly. And I also just literally released an hour-long episode involving somebody by the name of Margaret Barclay, who was a witch that was burnt in Scotland in 1618. It's a fantastic story. Well, it's actually not a fantastic story. It's a terrible story. Just torture and people dying, lots of people dying, families destroyed. It's terrible. And yeah, you're welcome to go on Wikipedia and look up Margaret Barclay and be like, yeah, I know about her. But Wikipedia does not have that special Doug sauce. I do think I tell a pretty good story, and I do think that I made a really good episode. It's I went all out on production values for that one. In fact, here's a little snippet of it. Have a listen, because this episode, this is the one that I mentioned earlier on during my interview with Darragh about this figure that apparently added to the story that there was a black dark man in the room. So have a listen to this this little snippet of my last Patreon episode. Now, what follows, we cannot be sure of 100%, because again, public anger becomes public. The quarrels you share out in the world, where there are other ears belonging to other people, can create stories of their own. And it is said that once this ship, the Gift of God, left harbor in Irvine, Margaret Barclay stood on the quay and watched the ship depart, and was said to have uttered a curse. God, if you can hear me, let never sea nor salt water bear them above that had injured me, but let the crabs eat them at the bottom of the sea. Much time passed since this was said to have happened, that Margaret Barclay had cursed this ship, and in that time the ship, the Gift of God, became considerably overdue from when it was supposed to be returning from France. Many people became somewhat antsy as to the fate of this ship. And then a very interesting character steps into the story. Somebody who was known around town for being a bit of a vagrant or charlatan, depending on who you would ask, by the name of John Stewart. Now, John claimed that he could see the future. In fact, he visited the wife of the owner of the ship, the Gift of God, the provost Andrew Tran, and told the wife that the ship was gone, that it had sunk, and that now she was a widow. Time passes, as it does. More people talking, more stories begin to be told. But eventually, 2 sailors from the Gift of God make their way back to Irvine with the unfortunate and devastating news that the Gift of God had met with disaster and sunk off the coast of England near Padstow. and that these two people that returned to Irvine, these two sailors, were the only survivors of that disaster. No doubt the stories begin to accelerate, and the public's suspicion seems to have headed in one direction, and that would be Margaret Barclay. All right, so that's a nice, toothsome little snippet for each and every one of you there. Yes, this episode certainly, in a way, ties in with what Dar and I have just covered in the episode you just listened to. If you think that I'm doing something cool here with the podcast, $7 American a month is all I'm asking for on Patreon. I've got so much stuff there. Videos on how to make incense or do fire cleanses. I've really gone out of my way to create almost a completely different thing than this podcast. And trust me, it is well worth the $7 a month. Everybody else is raising their prices. I'm keeping it at $7. What can $7 buy you? Well, it can buy you like 2 of those cloths that can clean your glasses. It can buy you a new mouse pad, you know? It can buy you, I was going to say like printer ink, but that's actually really expensive. So it can't buy you printer ink for those things that nobody uses anymore, printers. But the only reason I'm bringing up printers is because I had to fix a printer. Anyways, long story. Printers suck. Don't use them. Everything should be digital, right? Right? Just kidding. No, the material things are still good to have. Analog, I think, is the word that everybody uses. Anyway, $7 American, US a month, $17. That's basically gives you access to a whole different show. I truly consider it my best work. I spend so much time on it. I spend more time on my Patreon than I do on this podcast. And that's not because I don't like doing this podcast. It's just that I really get to be the Doug I'm supposed to be on the Patreon, and just my wildly creative and interesting self there on the Patreon. That's where you can find the true magic of Doug. So patreon.com/whatmagicistthis, or head to whatmagicistthis.com. Click on any number of the Patreon buttons there. And please, I would love to see your support there. If you are not a fan of the paying every month kind of thing, and you'd just like to throw me a nice chunk of change while you can, that is through PayPal. Head to whatmagicistthis.com. Once there, find any number of the PayPal buttons. Click that. You can give me $5, $10, $20, $2,000. Any amount helps. It all literally goes back into making sure I pay my bills. That's it. Yeah, I know it's obvious that podcasting, you're going to have bills, you're going to have website stuff, you're going to have your editing programs and your hosting. It costs money. I spend about $200 a month just keeping this thing going. So that's not cheap. It's not terribly expensive, but it's certainly not cheap. Any money given through the PayPal goes right into making this podcast run the way that it does. It's been a while. I'm not considering it, but I'm saying that having commercials on my show, having an ad or two, would certainly ease some of the financial stress of keeping this show running. That's not a threat or anything. It's just it's possible, but I don't want it to be possible. So the way to make that not possible is to help me out either on Patreon or through PayPal. I would really don't want to put ads on this thing, and I'm going to try my best. My absolute best to not have any ads on What Magic Is This, because that would be lame. Truly. I only want to produce a show that I would want to listen to. So, yeah, ads on a magic podcast. No thanks. Yuck. So if you donate through PayPal, that keeps them ads away. It would be greatly, greatly appreciated. The last way to support me is through merchandise. Merchandise! Merchandise! And head to whatmagicistthis.com. Go to the little menu button there, click on merchandise, and guess what you'll find there? Merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, stickers, fridge. I can't say that right now. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to have a sip of water. All right. I know that's two shows in a row where I make weird mouth noises. You're welcome. Fridge magnets, tote bags, mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, kids onesies, all kinds of stuff with logos. What Magic Is This logos? Oh, baseball caps. I was looking at that earlier today. I was like, because my girlfriend's always like, Doug, you shouldn't be in the sun because you were a pasty white person. And I'm like, yep. She said, you should wear a hat. And then I said, But when I see people in baseball caps, I think that they're stupid. I actually try to talk to them as if they're a toddler because that's how horrible of a human being I am, is that I judge people for wearing baseball caps. But I saw that part of my merchandise are baseball caps, which is cool. So if you want baseball caps, you can grab a What Magic Is This baseball cap. I might get one. If I do, I'll post some pictures online. I'll go on Instagram with me wearing my own What Magic Is This baseball cap, and you can point at me and say, ha ha, you've become the very thing you hate. And I'll be like, yeah, but I'm not going to get skin cancer because a lot of my family are getting skin cancer now. It's actually, that's not a lie. Protect yourself. Truly, the sun wants to kill you if you're a pasty white person like myself and my ancestors. The sun only shone in Scotland, where my ancestors are from. The sun comes out for about 18 minutes every week. And so when it does, that's our white pasty bodies are just trying to soak up as much of that vitamin D as it can get. But now that I'm not living in Scotland, I live in a place where there's lots of sun all the time. I have to protect myself. What am I even doing? Oh yeah, merchandise. Anyways, if you want to protect yourself from the sun, you can get a What Magic Is This t-shirt and a What Magic Is This baseball cap. And yeah, it's all good. I don't see very much money from the merchandise, but it all helps. Truly does. And I get to see you wearing my stuff, and that's really, really cool. I never would have imagined that. So it's really awesome if you want to grab some What Magic Is This merchandise. But the place I really, really, truly want to see you, because it's my best work, is on the Patreon. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. 7 beans a month. That's nothing. That's so little. Anyways, best place to support me because I think I'm doing something cool here. And the show is getting better. I truly think it's getting better with each and every show. And man, I've got some great guests and great things happening before the end of the year. We're halfway through, just over halfway through the latter half of 2024 is going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what your reaction is going to be to the rest of the shows that are going to happen this year. But I need that support. I need it because this is my job, and I love doing my job. I wake up, I'm happy, I get to do my thing, but I can't do that without your support. Anyhow, all of these things, including the Patreon, which I would love to see you, are going to be available at whatmagicisthis.com. We'll see you there. Darragh, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I know I don't even have to say, I know if I was to ask you to come back on the show that you'd be willing to do so, but
oh, of course. Yeah.
Thank you so
much.
My pleasure. For all you do, Darragh.
Thank you for having me.
Please, everybody, Song of the Dark Man, Father of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads by Darragh Mason. Pick it up, read it, love it. There's so many places to go and so many areas of investigation. Also, I'm going to mention the footnotes in the back. The notes in the back there. Lots of really great book suggestions there. Truly, I'm going to say there's not going to be a ton of show notes for this episode. They're in Darragh's book. I'm doing it. I'm doing that thing. Buy Darragh's book. Get the show notes because there's really wonderful things. But also the Survey of Scottish Witch Trials is a great.
Amazing resource.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, I did a bit of a deep dive on witches and witch hunting the last month. Yeah, and that was my go-to site. It's we're missing a lot of information, but what we do have is actually quite incredible. And
yeah, it's incredible. It really is.
Darragh, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you real soon.
My pleasure, Douglas. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. That's the show, everybody. Come on back to What Magic Is This, where we'll talk about more of this dark, mysterious, therianthropic, sinister, but also chaotic, but also just a daemon of creative and wild things that we like to call magic and the occult. Until next time, everybody, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. Until then, take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.